Hi and welcome. My name is Eric William Wellstrand. This is section 9 of the Introduction to the Economy of Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries. In this section, I will first and foremost try to sum up what I have discussed in the previous sections. Then I'll try to put all this into one big context and try to see what are the challenges for Saudi Arabia as a whole and also the other GCC countries going forward. Of course, in the short term, they will remain being large oil and gas exports. For Saudi Arabia, predominantly there'll be oil. Most likely, I'm not going to try to speculate in the oil price going forward, but assuming the oil price remains relatively high, I base that on, of course, there seems to be sluggish demand in Europe and North America, but at the same time, we hopefully the growth in the West or the emerging markets, China, India, and so on, will sort of counterbalance this, and I assume oil prices will stay relatively high, around the current level. This will, of course, in the short term, mean continued high income for Saudi Arabia, budget surpluses. I believe Saudi Arabia will continue with its diversification program, continue to give incentives for foreign companies to come here and set up industry, continue their regulatory developments. Hopefully, maybe we'll see finding some progress on the GCC integration. We talked about the customs union, GCC currency, things like that. When it comes to diversification for Saudi Arabia, petrochemicals is the largest, will continue to be the largest. That's also where most of the investment is going. Mining is a potential third leg of the economy. Also, tourism, financial services are places that we might see growth in the years to come. The high oil prices of the last couple of years have basically also, to a certain degree, covered up for a big problem Saudi Arabia is facing. You have a very large growth in public expenditure, roughly 13% growth per year in the period 2013 to 2010. This is definitely not or stopped during the Arab Spring. Quite the contrary, it has accelerated. Most countries in the GCC had some sort of stimulus package, some sort of increased benefits to ward off any potential Arab Spring. There was never really any danger, as far as I know, of any popular uprising here in Saudi Arabia. But still, the government felt that or I assume that's why they did it. They had to go out and spend a lot of money just to be sure. One major problem with increasing benefits in Saudi Arabia is that they've historically proven to be very hard to roll back. Now, of course, this is the same in any country. It's always hard to roll back benefits when a population has gotten accustomed to them. Of course, in a democracy, things are a little bit different. You're sort of more in it together. You can try. Hopefully, we'll see this, and we're having problems doing this in many of the European countries struggling right now. But to a certain extent, you see that people seem to accept that times are tough and we have to cut back on spending. In a monarchy or like a authoritarian regime such as Saudi Arabia, this is a lot harder. I've talked many times about the so-called unofficial contract between the population and the ruling royal family. Yes, the royal family is secure today, but if they started, taking away benefits from the population, this could change. For instance, when the oil prices were high in the mid 70s into the 80s, Saudi Arabia suddenly had a very high and unexpected revenues, which they started spending on public expenditure across the board, large-scale infrastructure, health services, any education, basically everything. The problem was when the oil prices started falling, we had pretty low oil prices for large parts, for instance, in the 90s. The government did not cut back on spending. In fact, they started running large public deficits. They really didn't stop running a deficit because they reformed anyway. What happened was the oil prices started climbing again, and that's why I sort of haven't heard anything about it, and they've been able to pay back much of the debt they built up. I mentioned previously the government now only has a break-even price of oil at roughly $85. That is quite high, and that number will continue to increase unless they change many things. Among the biggest things they have to change is what I call the energy challenge. The energy challenge is the rapidly increasing domestic use of energy. One reason for this is, of course, population growth. Another reason is the enormous waste here in Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries. In fact, the oil spent per dollar of GDP created, as it has gotten better and better in most of the world, but in Saudi Arabia it's gotten steadily worse and worse. One of the reasons is, of course, that people have very cheap energy. I'm talking about all kinds of forms of energy, petrol for your car, electricity, industry gets cheap feedstocks, and so on. Bottom line is, they're currently spending 30% of their oil production domestically, and this is going to increase a lot in the years to come. This will lead to less and less oil that can be used for export income, and if you include the population growth, the oil export per capita will decrease even rapidly or even faster. They need to change this. They need to either change their consumption patterns dramatically, or they have to find other sources of energy. It seems to be they're going for the second option. There are large-scale plans for nuclear and solar power. Of course, not much has happened on the ground here yet, so people have to wait and see how this works out. So to sort of sum up, in the short term, most likely we're going to continue to see budget surpluses, high revenue, lots of investment going into infrastructure, diversification programs, and so on. Then, it's very hard to say when the problems will start because they're so dependent on the price of oil. I'm not going to try to sit here and if I knew what the price of oil was going to be in the next 10, 20 years, I would quit my job tomorrow. But using sort of the consensus view, what the future price of the oil in the oil market, they have a window opportunity, say 10 to 20 years. They will start running budget deficits way before that, but they have built up a lot of reserves. They can use them like they did in the 90s for quite a few years. But if they're not able to modernize their society or their economy within that window opportunity, they're going to be in big problems. So what do they have to do? They got to continue to diversify their economy. They have to continue educating the population or in a way that they're well suited for the modern workplace. They cannot just continue studying humanities and religious studies. Unfortunately, they also have to change the work ethics here. The system where the Saudis sit back and relax and the expats do most of the work is cannot last forever. They can't have 90% of the employees in the private sector being foreigners, and they have to they have to solve their energy challenge. Lots have happened in the last 20 years, and I see a lot of good development. So I don't want to say that I don't believe they're going to make it, because that sounds a little pessimistic, and like I said, they've done a lot in 20 years, so they can do a lot in the next 20 years, but quite frankly, I don't see that things are happening quick enough. Yes, lots are happening in the educational system, for instance, but they don't have that long time, and particularly with the high population growth, I personally believe they're going to have a hard time. What I believe is going to happen is we're going to continue to see real GDP per capita falling. Like I said previously, it's been rising the last couple of years because of high oil prices, but it was higher in the 80s than it is today. And from a political point of view, this has, of course, huge implications. If times get real tough, anything can happen, or we can have an Arab or a Gulf Spring maybe, but that'll be too much speculation. I'm not going to go there now. But I don't want to end my presentation on with a negative comment. In the short term, things looks very good. We're going to have solid growth. There is large potential for foreign companies. There's a big export potential market here. These problems are many years in the future. Maybe they'll be able to solve them. Many things can happen. Yeah. And with that, I basically want to thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.